Hey, this is Troy Taylor with the Championship Football Coaches Clinic. My girlfriend knew one thing, that I had the dad of the Raiders coach on tonight. So she knew how important this was. And I think I have figured it out. We have Coach Thom McDaniels. I have him on FaceTime on my phone, streaming, so you can see him. This is how important this is, Coach. So this is the third time we've tried this, and this is probably the greatest coaching job I've ever done. I mean, this is like, it's almost like coaching Tom Brady to 6 Super Bowls, Coach. That's the way I kind of feel.
Yeah, but I'm no Tom Brady when it comes to technology.
That's okay, Coach. It's all about want to, and I got the want to, Coach. So I told people, I said, man, I got Josh McDaniels' dad on the podcast, and people said, how in the world did you get Josh McDaniels' dad? I said, I just asked him on Twitter. So now I got you on FaceTime streaming through the clinic, Coach. Tell the clinic a little bit about yourself, Coach.
Okay, I was born in Western New York and moved to Orville, Ohio. It's a small town in northeastern Ohio when I was like 4 years old. And so I grew up in Orville, again, a little small town, a football town. They love football. They had great tradition. And I fell in love with football as a kid in grade school. And, that love only grew in the middle school. I was not a great player. I played, but I was not a great player. But I fell in love with the game at a young age. I played for 2 great coaches who impacted my life significantly. They recognized that I loved the game. I knew, as a kid in high school that I wanted to be a football coach. So upon graduation from Orville High School in 1967, I went to Clarion State University, graduated from there in 1972. Certified as a teacher, and I was an English teacher. And the English teacher football coach combination is not real common, but it was an easy way to get hired because they're always looking for English teachers. There's a lot of guys who coach and teach history or phys ed, but I majored in English because it was easy for me. Following graduation, I went back and coached football for my former high school football coach. I had two great coaches in high school, a guy by the name of Bill Schunkweiler and a guy by the name of Mo Tipton. And both men impacted, my life in positive ways. And it's because of them that I fell in love with the game and wanted to coach. I coached at Orville for a few years, and then I had an opportunity to go to a nearby place, Mansfield, Madison, with a little bit more responsibility. So off I went to Mansfield, Madison. Some of the people who were coaching at Orville when I was there the first time, they moved on up into administration and opened some opportunities for me back at Orville with more responsibility. So I went back to Orville, for a few years. And then in 1980, I had an opportunity to come from Orville to Canton McKinley High School as an assistant coach. And Canton McKinley High School is one of a few, public high schools, Division I, big school, public high schools, with great football history and great football tradition. And so I couldn't pass up that opportunity. 2 years later, in 1982, the head coach who hired me moved from McKinley to Akron University as an assistant coach, and the job opened. I applied for the job, and I got it in 1982. I was the head coach there for 16 seasons, culminating in a state national championship in 1997. Following my time at Canton McKinley, I went to Warren Harding, another tradition-rich high school football town in northeastern Ohio. So I had the good fortune of being at 2 places that were great. Football mattered, and the people in those communities loved football before I ever arrived. And it was a matter of being in the right place at the right time. We had great success at Warren Harding. Had a lot of really great players who went on to play D1 football and D2 and D3. But coaching at 2 places where football mattered immensely, to the extreme sometimes. I mean, we didn't want to win. We had to win. That's what they were used to. And I was built for that because of my upbringing in Orrville. We had great success. And I had great players, great assistant coaches. And I retired, as a head coach after the 2006 season and had to wean myself out of being a head coach by being an assistant all over again. So I moved back down the ladder and was an assistant coach at 3 different places for about 4 or 5 years. And I retired in 2012 after 40 years of high school football coaching. And here we are today.
Yes, sir. And in the podcast, you talked about every step of the ladder is important. And the advice that you gave your sons when Josh went and GA'd for Nick Saban at Michigan State, and then when Ben went to Minnesota and GA'd for Glenn Mason, you said, whatever you do, coffee, make the best coffee. If you have to pick somebody at the airport, be the best at it. Talk a little bit about that, Coach, your philosophy on everything's important.
Well, we have job descriptions as head coaches, and I had job descriptions, for assistant coaches, specific to each position. And whatever job they were doing, as assistant coaches on that job description, that was the most important job at that particular moment in time. And so I told my kids the same thing. When they were great players for me in high school and they wanted to coach, they'd been around the game and at practice since they were 4 or 5 years old. As a result, they had high football IQs. So upon finishing high school, Josh, was a GA for Nick, as you mentioned, at Michigan State, and for Glenn Mason at Minnesota for Ben. But what I told him at that point in time, I says, this is where your old man's influence ends. I can't help you anymore. So you gotta meet Nick's expectations. You gotta meet Glenn Mason's expectations. And whatever they tell you to do, you got to do that better than anybody's ever done it before. And as you referenced, if they told you to make coffee, then you do it better than any GA's ever done that before. If they tell you to pick up a recruit at the airport, you do that better than anybody's ever done it before. So I was a guy that was taught and completely believed that nothing about football was unimportant. And my sons, bought into that, and they believe in that, and they demonstrate that. They have every step of the way wherever they've coached. So, there's nothing that's not important about football, whatever that happens to be. And so they took that advice and they ran with it. And then Glenn Mason and Nick Saban, they impacted my sons' lives, and helped them, make the next step on their coaching journey. And, ultimately now one of them is the head coach of the Raiders and the other is an assistant coach with the Houston Texans.
Yes, sir. And as I was doing my homework, I did not know that Josh, after GAing for Nick Saban, got out of coaching and went to work for a plastic company as a salesman.
Yeah, that was. I can't explain it, and he can't either. All I know is that he didn't last a year in the plastics industry.
That's like Lou Holtz when he says about that when he was working at William and Mary that he sold cemetery plots. He sold his TV, he sold his radio, but he never once sold a cemetery plot.
Well, I think part of that might have been a result of the poverty that he experienced as a GA at Michigan State.
Man.
Because back then you didn't make a whole lot of money, and they paid for your graduate school. But I made his car payment, I paid for his apartment, and I paid for his car insurance when he's GAing for Nick Saban at Michigan State. And I did the same thing for Ben when he was at Minnesota with Glenn Mason. So I think he had a taste of poverty and thought that he'd make a little bit of money for a while. He might have been a little temporarily insane there to get out of football and go into the plastics industry for less than a year. But he came to his senses and it all ended well for him because there was a guy that was a GA ahead of him at Michigan State that ended up as a quality control guy in New England. New England had an opening, an entry-level opening. His name is Brian Daboll. He's the head coach of the Giants now.
Yeah.
And Bill said to Brian, he said, we need an entry-level guy. Do you know a guy? He says, yeah, I know a guy. He said, what's his name? He said, Josh McDaniels. So Josh interviewed with Bill.
And what does that mean, Coach? I mean, he gives you a big task to do, right? And then you have to do it, and then you get paid the 18 for 18, right? The 18 hours for $18,000.
Yeah, well, it's actually 20. You're 20 years old, 20 grand, you work 20 hours a day.
Man. And there's been a lot of them like that, Coach. Golly.
Oh yeah. But he left for New England, with the full intention of taking our approach with him. Whatever it is, if you're drawing scout cards, you do that better than it's ever been done before. And Bill on a scout card, he didn't want the wide out, on the card to be a 32nd of an inch off of where he was supposed to be. He worked late into the nights, with Nick Caserio, who's now a GM with the Texans. Bill was going to test your love for the game, early in your time there. He was going to find out how much you actually loved it, with that 20-20-20 approach. And obviously Josh passed that test.
Yeah, and Coach Belichick is the son of a coach, Steve Belichick, the great scout at the Naval Academy. And I told you off camera, Coach, I'm a high school coach, 24 years in Virginia. My son's 11. And, if I look at your career, you spent 40 years in high school football in Ohio, one of the most prestigious and traditional high school states in America. I mean, if it wasn't for your 40 years of hard work and dedication and commitment, I mean, your sons, they reap the benefits of that, Coach. And I mean, do people bring that up to you?
Yeah, they do sometimes, but I think that they benefited because I was a coach of a very successful big time high school football program, and every college coach, from everywhere, they were coming in there to recruit our players. And so I made a lot of connections and a lot of contacts, and they came from the East Coast to the West Coast. And so, getting to know those guys as a recruiter, when Nick was an assistant coach for George Pearls, I knew Nick. But then, as my guys, graduated from high school and college and were seeking GAs, the connections with those guys when they were just assistant coaches recruiting my building, that paid off in both instances, both with Glenn and Nick. And everybody came in those buildings, Warren Harding and Canton McKinley, and we applied everywhere. Ben got one offer and Josh got one offer, and that's all they needed was one.
That's it. All you need is one. Coach, I want this to be about yourself, but also about high school football in Ohio. And my dad's from Appalachia, Virginia, which is a coal mining town. And, there were some great players, Thomas Jones and Julius Jones. They were running backs in pro football. They were from Big Stone Gap. And football is very, very important, just like in Orville. Football was very, very important. But, as a high school coach, you said 3 players who were the best players you ever coached, and those guys didn't even have a long career in the NFL. So we're doing more than just getting guys Division I offers. We're changing lives. We're making them better husbands, dads, Americans. And I know you had that philosophy. And talk about that discipline, Coach, that you had in these inner city schools.
Well, again, McKinley and Warren Harding were both inner city programs. And I grew up in Orville, and that was a diverse little small town. And so I'm comfortable in those settings. I think I work best in those settings. Traditionally and historically, kids at Canton McKinley and Warren Harding could run like crazy, and they were willing to hit. And my contribution to them as gifted athletes who could run and were willing to hit, my contribution was to make sure that we added discipline, to the program, and we added unselfishness to the program, and some discipline, some structure, some direction, and being unselfish, and at a time when and it's even worse now, people are prone to be selfish. But we sold that. Those kids bought it, and that let that speed and that toughness make a difference, and that's why we won a lot of games.
Amen, Coach. So when I think about Ohio football, off camera we talked about Coach Paul Brown, and
Yes.
he won a mythical state championship in the
Yes.
state of Ohio. And then, if legend is true, basically the Ohio State job opened up, and every high school coach in Ohio said, if you do not hire Paul Brown, we're not going to send our players to Ohio State. You can correct me if I'm wrong, but he went there and won a national championship, and then he went to the Browns and won a national championship, and then started the Bengals. So you were at the rival school of
Yes.
Massillon.
Yes.
So
Canton McKinley and Massillon, I think, is the most storied and the best high school football rivalry in the country.
Yes, sir.
My son was the senior quarterback co-captain at the 100th game between those schools in 1994. So you do the math. If it was 100 years in 1994 and it's now 2023, that's how many times those guys met. In that rivalry, and Paul Brown, he helped to establish that, and he enhanced, Massillon. It was already, again, historically and traditionally a football power in Ohio, but he enhanced it. He's credited with many things. The face mask, for instance, the modern day face mask was an innovation of his. The draw play, they say, was an innovation of his. He used to messenger plays with the guards. And we did that when I was in high school, and we did that when I first started coaching. And that's all filtered down from Paul Brown. He was one of the first guys to back in the day, they used 16 millimeter to video and to tape games before we had tape. It was movie film. But he
The Wonderlic test. He was the first with the IQ test, right?
I don't know that, but his legend is so large that I don't know if it's true or not. I just know that I'm going to believe it about him. There may be fiction built into the legacy of Paul Brown with the fact. That doesn't matter. That doesn't diminish it for me as an opponent, as a guy that competed against those schools. But he is a legendary man, not just at Massillon, but in the state of Ohio.
Yes, sir. And when my son was young, my son's a sixth grader right now. I can't remember what it was, but my son knew who Paul Brown was at a very young age, and he must have went to church and he heard something about Paul. And he thought that Paul in church was Paul Brown. I mean, it's crazy being the coach's son. I told you when I got married the first time, my groomsmen took me to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, Coach. And
Awesome.
Like Coach Madden says, like those gold busts, they talk. And I mean, I just got chills, and I think I even cried when I went in there. That's because I love coaches. I love coaches. I love coaching. I love football. I love everything about it, Coach. Talk about your wife. I mean, in your son's wives. Do you have your first love is football?
Well, my wife was my first great hire, and I think that's important for people who are thinking about going into coaching. That's an important consideration. It's significantly important consideration because it takes a special lady to tolerate as much time as we spend away from the home and away from, you know, our children and away from our wives. She was one of 4 kids. She had 3 brothers. She was a cheerleader. She loved the game. And I reminded her that I loved football before I fell in love with her. and you know, that was not meant to be disrespectful or to diminish how I cared for her. But she knew what she was getting into when she married me. And I also told my daughters-in-law the same thing before they married Ben and married Josh. I said, now there's a couple things you need to understand. One, he loved football before he loved you. And so you have to try to understand that. And when they leave early in the morning at 5:30 and they don't come home till 11:30 or midnight, they may not have missed you during that long day. And that's not just to indicate that you're not significant, but they're doing something that they love. That's not something they're being paid to do. That's something that they chose to do. And then the other 2 things I told him is you're gonna get fired and you're gonna have to move. And they looked at me and they had no comprehension of what I said. Now, they got married and they both understand all that I told them, and that was completely true. So they've experienced all of that. And they're good coaches' wives.
No doubt, Coach. You know, so after Paul Brown in Ohio, you got to talk about Coach Hayes and, you know, just the legend that surrounded him. Was he the head coach at Ohio State when you started coaching?
Yeah, he was the head coach at Ohio State when I came up as a grade school kid and a middle school kid. And I believe he was the head coach at the beginning of my high school career. I know that Earl Bruce followed him. So whether Woody was the head coach, you know, during my entire high school career, or whether he was, you know, the head coach at the beginning and Earl Bruce was, I'm not sure. I can't exactly remember that, but he was legendary. And back at that time, you know, Paul Brown, you know, getting the Ohio State job for Massillon. Well, Woody Hayes was a high school coach too.
Wow.
And he went from coaching high school football to coaching at Miami of Ohio.
Okay.
Which is in the Mid-American Conference, and they've got remarkable, you know, history.
Coach Schembechler, Harbaugh.
Yes, exactly. But back in the day, you could go from high school to being a head coach in colleges. That was the path to being a college coach. Now it's the GA route.
Yeah.
You know, that's the route that people take then. But Woody was, you know, 3 hours in a cloud of dust. He believed that. He breathed that. That was you know, that was absolutely sincerely what he believed in. He was famous for, you know, people called it multiple things, but it was double tight ends and 3 backs in the backfield. And I think, you know, going back, it was called the T formation.
Yeah.
But Woody called it robust.
Robust.
Yes. And so, you know, I became a head football coach in 1992. And when we got down in goal line situations, and you know, we were an I formation team and we'd offset the fullback, and, you know, we were twin split, tight end, you know, motion. But when we got down inside the 10-yard line, we got into the robust formation. And that was because I was the kid that grew up in Ohio, and that's what Woody Hayes would want us to do.
Yeah.
You know, so I was a disciple, and we were unstoppable in that robust formation. Again, not everybody did it, but we did it. I had 2 halfbacks who could not just carry the ball, but block for the fullback. And we had 5 plays that we ran out of that robust formation. We had 3 run plays, 2 play action passes, and I don't think we were ever denied. You know, when we got into that formation, and that was because, you know, Woody Hayes did that at Ohio State. And I'm an Ohio kid, and so we're going to do that too as the head football coach.
Amen. The school that I'm at now, L.C. Byrd High School, it was built in 1978, and the first head coach was Tom Brady, who was the O-line coach at Maryland and the O-line coach at Northwestern. And then Peachy was the coach. He was from Liberty. And then they brought a coach from Alpena, Michigan, named Coach Dutch Schrotenborough. And when he came, they closed down the school, I guess, in Alpena. But he brought the Michigan Wings. They ran the I formation, and they ran a 4-3 defense, just like Coach Schembeckler. So it's like they brought the tradition down here. And I know that Coach Schembeckler had been an assistant to Coach Hayes. So when
Bo took that same philosophy to Michigan with him.
Yeah. So it all originates with Coach Hayes. And I listened to the podcast, and when Josh got let go with the Broncos, you told him to write down everything that he would have done differently. Can you talk a little bit about that, Coach?
Yeah. He was the head coach, in Denver, and they played at Kansas City. And he wanted me to come to the game, so he flew me to Kansas City. So I was at the Denver Kansas City game at that time, and it was a close game. The Broncos lost, and he gathered up, the team and the coaches, and they headed back to Denver. And I went to the airport and got on the plane to fly back home to Ohio, and my plane touched down. This was the next day. I stayed overnight and had a flight out the next day. My plane touched down in Ohio, and that's traditionally when I turn my phone back on. I guess we're supposed to wait till we get to the gate, but I turned my phone on, and it rang, and it was him. And he told me, Dad, he said, the Broncos let me go, and the first thing out of my mind was, okay, I want you to do two things. I want you to make a list of all of the things that you would do differently. I want you to reflect on that right now, and I want you to start now. And you reflect on your experience in Denver, and you write down all the things that you would do differently, and you write down all the things that you would do the same way, because there's going to be a next time. And he literally did that. And that's in his briefcase today. But I think that's probably good advice for somebody who gets let go, that they dismiss or fire. I think you need to, look back quickly and write it down so that you don't forget it. Because in that next opportunity, you want to try to duplicate those good things you did, and you want to avoid those things that you didn't think that you did very well. So he followed that advice, and he has that in his briefcase to this day. That goes with him wherever he goes.
I listened and watched Josh's press conference when he got the Raiders job, and the one thing that he said that he would do differently, do you remember what it was, Coach?
I listened to it too, and there were probably many things, but one of the things that he learned from the Denver experience is that he had to invest more in relationships.
People, yeah. You win with people. That's Woody Hayes' book. You win with people.
Yeah.
So what do you think he meant by that, Coach? Was he just young and he didn't realize, or is he just being modest and humble and admitting that?
No. Again, we love this game, and we were intense about it, and that was never manufactured intensity for me, and it wasn't manufactured intensity for him. We wanted a certain outcome. When we coach, it's the same thing all of us want. We want a W at the end of the game. But beyond that, there were a lot of wins in my life when I wasn't happy with the way we played. We played well enough to win, but I was convinced that in order to win
and beat the best guys on your schedule, Coach. That's what you said.
We had to play up to a standard of excellence, and so that's what we did. We tried to measure up to a standard of excellence in playing the game, and we would collect wins along the way if we met those expectations. Well, he believes in that too. Well, that being the case, sometimes, and Woody was that way, and Bud was that way. You could win and not be happy with how you played.
Yeah.
And I didn't hide that very well, and he didn't hide that very well. But what we have to be careful to do is we have to let people celebrate the wins, and then when we get back to practice, we got to go back and fix the things that we didn't feel good about. I don't know that I always did that well, and I'm not sure that Josh did that well when he was in Denver, because we weren't used to losing. We didn't like to lose, but we don't have a right to make everybody around us miserable because we won and didn't play well.
Yeah.
I made that mistake, and I think maybe he made that too. So his whole thing was about having consideration for other people's feelings, and caring about them, beyond the X's and O's and beyond football practice and meetings and so on and so forth. So investing more in relationships with everybody in the building, from the people who make breakfast and lunch and dinner, and for guys in the equipment room and the guys in the training room. He was determined to establish relationships that could withstand the intensity, that he was going to coach the game with, and that's what he's doing in Vegas right now.
Yeah, I coached football at Virginia Union University. It's HBCU here in Richmond for 3 years. This is where Charles Oakley played basketball and Ben Wallace. And I had a coach, Mike Spencer, he was the head coach at St. Thomas Aquinas in between George Smith's 2 stints as the head coach in Fort Lauderdale. And him and a young coach got into a big argument about, does Tom Brady need a coach? And in that podcast, you talked about when your son and Tom Brady first met, what Tom Brady told him. And can you talk a little bit about that he has to be coached hard? He wants to be coached hard.
Yes, and that's a core concept of our coaching philosophy too. And it was on the room in the weight room. It was on the wall in the weight room. It was on the wall of every locker room I've ever coached in. But we're going to expect the most from the best.
Ooh.
And not everybody does that. There's an awful lot of people that pamper their best players.
Man.
I was never going to do that. Josh is not going to do that. Ben's not going to do that. And there's a lot of other people that don't, but there are more that do. No. If I had Maurice Clarett, or I had Mark Manningham, or I had Danny Herron, we were going to expect the most from our best players. And if we did that, it elevated everybody else. We were not going to pamper them. We are going to be demanding, and we're going to expect the most from the best. And so that's the relationship that he had to have with Tommy, because frankly, Tommy was already probably a little bit more established as a player than Josh was as a coach. Now, I think over time, Josh earned his props as a coach, but they were about the same age. They got married about the same time. They've got kids the same age. They're very close, and if they don't talk every day, that's an exception. But there were some meetings, and there were some times, where Josh, he was playing the role of coach, and Tommy was playing the role of the player. But Josh dared to be demanding to Tommy, and Tommy wanted it to be that way. It didn't always feel good, maybe, but that's how Tom wanted to be coach, and Josh was more than willing to do it because he had experienced it with me.
Yeah,
experienced it at Nick Saban.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had heard something about Josh. I don't know how many years ago this was, but they said that he knew defense better than most defensive coordinators, and that's why he was such a good offensive coordinator. Do you believe in that philosophy, Coach?
Yeah, well, and again, we need to give Bill Belichick credit.
Yeah.
Josh was a quarterback and a kicker in high school. He was a quarterback and then transitioned to wide receiver at John Carroll. So his whole football experience, for the most part, was spent on the offensive side of the ball. So when he gets hired as a quality control guy in New England, the first year there, he's part-time with personnel in the personnel department, and he's part-time, with the coach. He assisted. Oh my goodness, I went blank here. He assisted.
Bill Parcells, his son-in-law.
No. But he was an assistant to the secondary coach at the Patriots. Bill put him on defense, knowing that he wanted to educate him there and get his master's or doctorate in defense, knowing that he would someday, at some point in time, if he was good and he stayed in New England, he'd bring him back to the offensive side of the ball. So Bill gets credit for that, and he's done it with other coaches new to the system. He puts them on the other side of the ball so they learn the other side so they can be better at the side that they're most familiar with. Josh learned. I have a hard time explaining this, and I want to be careful I don't betray any secrets. But what they do offensively, we always have to do what our players do best. But he's really good at identifying the strengths and weaknesses of what's going on the other side of the ball, and then formulating a game plan accordingly.
Yes, and you talked about that in your other podcast, how good Coach Belichick is by the time those guys get back to practice on Wednesday, on giving them a few things that they have to do to be able to win. That's game planning. I mean, that's setting a goal. We got to do this to win. And they said, I heard one of the guys on one of the podcasts talk about at the Broncos how well prepared they were when your son was the head coach of the Broncos. It was one of the ones maybe with Fred Taylor and those guys. But
I don't recall that. But you're right about the reference to Bill and the NFL week is different than high school week. They show up on Monday and they treat injuries, and they look at the film and they get maybe a sneak peek and have access to the next opponent. Tuesday is their day off, but when they show up on Wednesday, Bill's got the offensive plan, defensive plan, and special team plan that he presents or has his coaches present, and they narrow it down to a few specific things that we need to do these things well in order to win against this opponent this week. And they might be totally different from what they did the previous week and what they're going to do the week following. They're a game specific, planning team. In terms of offense, defensive, and special teams plan, it's specific to the opponent. So it may have nothing in common with what they did, the last week or the next week. But yeah, Bill was good at doing that. And, because Josh shares that with me, I began to do that with my guys. And I called it the keys to a winning performance offensively. And I tried to articulate them in written form. And then we talked about them with our guys. These are things we need to do to beat Massillon. And if we plan to do that, then that's what we tried to do.
I talked to you about Coach Belichick, and then I talked to Corey Heatherman, who's the linebacker coach at Rutgers. And I talked to Corey a couple of weeks ago, and he told me that Coach Belichick comes there. And I said, well, just tell me 3 things about him. And the first thing he said was he doesn't play around. 2, he listens to everybody. And then 3, he tells you like it is. And I listened to the podcast, and you said that your son said that Bill Belichick was the greatest listener he's ever met. So can you talk a little about that?
Well, again, as Josh continued to work for Bill and then became the Denver's coach, and now he's with the Raiders. There are a lot of people that ask him about his Patriot experience, and they ask about Bill because Bill's a very private person. But Josh says he's the best listener that he's ever known. And that's not necessarily something that people would expect to hear about Bill Belichick. But Josh left no doubt about the fact that here's this man who's maybe the best NFL coach that's ever been, who is a football savant, and yet he's the best listener. He doesn't coach, by telling everybody what to do. The decisions they make are decisions that are made, as a coaching staff, and Bill signs off on everything. But what he's great at is listening to what other people have to say to make the idea better. And that's probably one of the keys to his success. We should all do that better than we do, but Josh thinks Bill's the best at it.
Yeah, I mean, there's only one person, we could really put in his category, and that's Nick Saban. And he was an assistant at Ohio State. Do you remember when Nick Saban was an assistant coach at Ohio State, Coach?
Yeah, he recruited Canton McKinley.
So, it's like all intertwined there. He was around Coach Hayes, and focus on the now. Do the best at what you're doing right now. Don't focus on the result. But I told you before we started filming, one of my favorite football plays of all time, and I always show this to my players. Everybody knows who Sean Taylor is, and no respect to Sean Taylor at all. But when I was watching the football game, when Ohio State University was playing the U, and the U had Larry Coker as their coach, and Coach Tressel was the coach of Ohio State. And I still want to talk about the other Ohio State coaches, Earl Bruce, Jim Tressel, and those guys, and Coach Meyer. But when Maurice Clarett took the football away from Sean Taylor on that interception, he could have hung his head. And I told you off camera, I said that has to be coached. Maurice was a freshman. So, Coach, how do you feel about that? I know you've already told me off camera, but.
Well, Maurice was a great player, and he was an instinctive player who liked to be coached hard too. But when Sean intercepted the ball and began to run with it, Maurice didn't go after Sean to make the tackle. He went after Sean to take the ball away from him, and watch the replay. There's no attempt to make the tackle. The attempt is to get the football back. And I think I credit Maurice's reaction, spontaneously, was to the fact that we made such a big deal about ball security with our backs. Ball security is job security, yours and mine. I think in a moment he recognized that Sean, wasn't demonstrating great ball security, and so that the football is available to me. And again, this is in the twinkling of an eye. But he goes from whatever assignment he had on that pass that was intercepted. He went from being an offensive player to a defensive player in a split second. And when you watch the replay, his full intention is taking the football. It's not about making the tackle. But that play turned the game around.
Yeah, and I watched the Maurice Clarett special on YouTube today when he came to the 20-year anniversary. And, Coach, he specifically said that he noticed that he did not have good ball security. And that was why he went after that football. And, a lot of people have forgotten about Maurice Clarett in the season that he had at Ohio State. I didn't even realize that was the last college football game he played in. But you told a story about Maurice not showing up to a team meal. Can you tell that story, Coach, when you coached him in high school?
Yeah. I got the Warren Harding job during Maurice's junior year. And Maurice was pretty much a legend in the Youngstown, Warren area. That's northeastern Ohio since he was in grade school, because he dominated the Pee-wee, the youth football programs that existed. He was dominant in middle school, unstoppable, physically very developed, for his age. And Warren Harding was his third high school. He was in one of the public schools in Youngstown as a freshman. He went to a nearby school, a suburb of Youngstown called Austintown Fitch as a freshman. And I'm sorry, he went there as a freshman, and then he was a sophomore at Warren Harding. And I get the job, and he's a junior. And once again, in the team meeting, I told them, and then I backed it up. We're going to expect the most from the best people. And I don't know who the best people in this room are right now, but you just need to understand I'm going to expect more from you than I am from anybody else.
Wow.
So think of yourself as a great player, then you have to get ready for great expectation from me. So it's my first year with him as a junior, and it's about the third or fourth week of the season, and we're off to a good beginning. And we provided a pregame meal to the players, and we usually fed the top 40, and we didn't feed everybody, but we were going to feed the top 40. And he didn't show up at the pregame meal, and then he showed up later, and when I asked him why he wasn't there, he told me that he wasn't hungry. and I told him, fine, then you show up and don't eat, but you don't just choose. You do not have, you're not in a position to make a decision about whether you show up or not. You show up and don't eat rather than not showing up at all. And that didn't feel good to him because he hadn't experienced that from a lot of the people in his coaching and his playing experience up to that particular time. He was that great player that was pampered and catered to, and that isn't who I am, and I couldn't do that. And when he didn't like the fact that I scolded him and addressed the problem that way, then I decided not to play him. And I wouldn't even take him to the game. It was an A game. I wouldn't even take him to the game as an undressed player. And we lost, I think, 13-7. And we'd have won with him. I'm certain of that. And he didn't take that kindly, so I sat him the next week too. He didn't play at all, didn't dress, and we won. But when that happened, the rest of the locker room got an enormous message. You've got to be unselfish, you've got to be disciplined, and you got to expect high expectation, or it's not going to work too well with this guy. And he was a model player for me from that point on. I have nothing but. And I have a great relationship with him to this day.
Yes, sir. And I've watched, what he's done since he got out of prison, and he's made a lot of money and he's helped a lot of people. Now, I'm going to ask you this because you've got guys like Nick Saban and Bill Belichick and Urban Meyer, and they have had players like Percy Harvin and Aaron Hernandez and guys who maybe were not around them, could not conform. But when they were within the group, within their team, they did conform. They followed the rules and they excelled. Is it something special about those guys? And what is it, Coach, that they can take guys who maybe when they're not around them can't act right, but then somebody like Maurice Clarett, you owned him, Coach. Like he won't going to step out of line again.
Well, I told you all I offer to the Canton McKinley players and the Warren Harding players is some direction, some structure. We're going to be disciplined. We're going to be unselfish. That's all I offer. I can't speak to Urban's approach or Nick's approach or Jimmy Tressel's approach. I'm pretty certain that they believed in those things to some extent also. I also know that coaching in inner city school systems that unfortunately some of our players don't grow up with that kind of approach in their homes, and they don't experience it in grade school. They don't experience maybe in middle school because again they're so good athletically that people are afraid to coach them, and we were never going to be afraid to coach great players. But I also believe that I never looked to make an example of anybody. but I also believe that if you were presented with the opportunity, then you shouldn't pass it up. So if Maurice hadn't done that, somebody else in my first year at Warren Harding, may have done something, and maybe that was the guy that I needed to make an example out of. But I think it was beneficial to Maurice. It was beneficial to our program because, from that point on, we were pretty doggone good, and we had very, very few issues with players at both McKinley and Warren Harding.
And I like what you said in the other podcast that, you can't guarantee that when they were not with you that they behaved. You can't guarantee after they left you that they did what was right. But when you said that you changed those programs because of the discipline and that they pretty much, you talked about, what was it, that you were going to bring respect, and you were going to represent those communities with their behavior.
Well, again, and this isn't specific to any one player, but, Canton McKinley and Warren Harding were both football rich and historical and traditional powers in the state of Ohio before I ever came along. And as I looked at them and what they had, I also tried to identify the things that I thought that they lacked. And when I was at Canton McKinley, we played Warren Harding. And I knew that they could run like crazy and they'd hit like crazy, but they weren't as disciplined as I thought they could have been, and we played them. And so I understood that about them. And Canton McKinley, we'd have been that way if we didn't demand discipline and we didn't demand, unselfishness and so on and so forth, we weren't going to get it. So let's address their need. And that's what I did based on what I saw. And apparently it was the right thing.
Yes, sir.
Because, forever and ever, they're going to run like crazy and they're going to, knock your socks off when they get there. And so, again, I didn't invent that. That's part Woody Hayes. That's part Nick Saban. That's part Bill Belichick. Those guys believed in that. Paul Brown, I'm sure, was a disciplinarian. I know he was, based on what I've heard about him.
Yeah.
And so, you take what they have, and then you provide them with what they need, and for me, it gave us great results.
You are from the same hometown as Coach Knight, correct, Coach?
Yeah, Bobby Knight. Yep, he was. I want to say he was maybe 6 or 8 years ahead of me, but yeah, Bobby Knight was again. He played for Bill Schunkweiler. I mentioned his name. Who was also the head basketball coach. So Bobby understood that, and then Bobby coached that way as a coach, obviously at Indiana and Texas.
Yeah, and I mean, now that's the general. So, have you ever been able to meet him, Coach? Have you talked to him about coaching?
I've met him on more than one occasion. When he wrote his first book, I'm trying to recall this, but I read the book and thought so much of it that I wrote him a letter, and he answered my letter.
Wow.
I don't know. I mean, I knew who he was, but I don't know that he remembered me. But I reminded him, that I'd grown up in Orville and that I'd read his book, and I got a great deal out of that. I have a library. As an English teacher, I'm a big reader, but I've got a huge library of books. If you were a great coach, I probably read it. But he answered my letter and wrote me back.
Yeah, I don't know if it went to TM, Coach.
Oh boy, yeah.
Is somebody calling you or somebody calling me?
Yes, somebody's calling my phone.
That's okay, Coach. If it's Coach, if it's Josh McDaniels, just put him on there, Coach.
No, it's not him. it's my former trainer.
Okay, well, they must have been a good trainer, Coach. If you're still talking to him.
Yeah. We back okay here?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. We're great. Mine's probably liable to ring next. So when I think of Ohio State football, the next two coaches were Earl Bruce and John Cooper, correct, Coach?
That's right.
Can you? I don't know a lot about Earl Bruce other than that Coach Urban Meyer was so tight with him, and Zach Smith is his son-in-law. But what can you tell me about Earl Bruce and John Cooper as being the head coaches of The Ohio State University?
Well, Earl was a disciple of Woody. And so you still got me right?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. So there were differences between Earl and Woody, I would imagine, but Earl's approach, to coaching and his belief in Ohio State and his respect for the history and tradition and so on and so forth, that was all very similar to what Woody presented. And Earl was also great with the Ohio High School Football Coaches Association. So was Woody. Those guys both understood that the high school coaches are prepping the players that we're going to recruit eventually if they were good enough, and they nurtured great relationships with the high school coaches throughout the state of Ohio. Both of those guys were great at that. But I met Urban when he was a graduate assistant for Earl, and this might be 1985 or 86 or something like that. I met him at a summer camp, and he was responsible as a GA, to stay in the dorm and to get the kids up in the morning and get them to breakfast, and then he helped coach the camp. But I met him then, never knowing that he would become the Urban Meyer that we know at this date and time. But he went into coaching, and he was an assistant coach multiple places, recruited my school when he was at Notre Dame, became the head coach at Bowling Green, and he called me and he said, can you come up for a weekend during spring ball? And I said, sure. And he said, because I want you to tell me everything I don't know about being a head coach.
Wow.
So we had stayed in touch, and I don't think he meant that literally, but Urban was very willing, to sit down and have a conversation or spend the weekend with him, whenever time was available, to talk about my transition from being an assistant to a head coach, and whether that helped him or not, I don't have any idea. But I just know that I respected him for thinking that some guy in high school might know something that I can benefit from, transitioning from an assistant coach to a head coach. And I'm sure that Urban had other head coaches, and had those same conversations with them. But then we stayed in touch, and he was at Iowa, and he was at Bowling Green, and he head coach at Ohio State, so on. So I had long relationships with him. And good relationships, with Earl and John Cooper and the other people there at Ohio State. Great relationship with Tress. I met him when they brought him into Ohio State to coach quarterbacks. I went.
So who did he coach quarterbacks for? Was that for Earl Bruce or was it for Cooper?
Yes, he was hired by Earl Bruce.
I know he came from Youngstown.
Came from Syracuse as an assistant.
Okay.
To Ohio State.
Yes, sir.
Then he went from Ohio State as an assistant to the head coach at Youngstown, and then came from Youngstown back to Ohio State as the head coach. So that's his path.
Yeah, and he was such a great coach, and I had his book, and I mean, he went on to be, I've only been to Ohio twice in my life, Coach. I went to Canton, and then I coached with Mike Spencer, Virginia Union, and he GA'd for Chuck Amato. So we drove to Akron from Richmond, met with Chuck Amato, and drove back. So that was that's the only 2 times I've ever been to Ohio. So John Cooper took over when Earl Bruce got let go. I know Coach Meyer, that didn't sit well with him. He talks about that. But I was going to say this about Coach Meyer. I've only met him twice in my life. He came to my high school with Billy Gonzalez when he was the head coach of Florida. And then we went down there to visit. I had an offensive tackle that plays in the NFL named Morgan Moses. And the thing that reminds me of what you said, that everything is important. When you talk to him or he talks to you, it is like nothing else in the world matters. I mean, everything in the world is just focused on what is occurring right then. Do you have the same feeling?
Yeah. And see, Urban's an Ohio guy. Okay, he was probably a little boy when Woody was still there, and obviously he GA'd for Earl Bruce and those guys. Football's serious business here, and they're at a place where you have to win and you have to beat Michigan. And there are high schools in Ohio where that's true. I had death threats as the head coach at Canton McKinley. We have people calling my phone, after maybe a loss or maybe we didn't cover, because they bet on the game. and they
was it a known fact what the spread was, Coach?
They would leave a message talking about what school bus number my kids were riding to school.
Man.
So I mean, it's serious business. We needed to beat Massillon, and we dominated that rivalry in the 80s and 90s, and I'm glad I was part of that. But it's important. So Urban's an intense dude. Nick's an intense dude. And not everybody is intense identically, and that kind of intensity, we can wear people out. And it's not attractive and it isn't for everybody. But if people can handle that intensity and tough coaching, I mean, look at Nick's results. Look at Urban's results until his Jacksonville experience. Look at Bill's results, Woody's results, Bruce's results, Bo's results. I mean, those guys, they weren't identical, but they had some similarities in being intense and football matter, and that was on everybody's list.
What was so great about Coach Tressel? I know he recruited Maurice Clarett, and that was influential. And I guess Coach Tressel had been the coach at Youngstown, and that's where Maurice was from, and that was so important on him winning that national championship by getting Maurice. What was so good about Coach Tressel? I know he had his manual that he went by and everything, but what was his secret?
Everything was good about Tress. He knew about Maurice when he was in grade school. They're in the same town. He's coaching college football, and Maurice is playing middle school football. But I told you, Maurice was a legend.
He was a phenom. He was like a Tiger Woods.
He was a phenom. I mean, he and LeBron was the best basketball player in the state of Ohio, and Maurice was the best football player.
Yeah, it's the same time period.
Yes, it's the same time period. But Tress was phenomenal. The relationships part. I don't know if I've ever been around anybody that did that better than Tress did. When he talked about having an open door, it was open to anybody at any time. And he cultivated and nurtured great relationships with the people who coached with him, for him, with the players who played for him, with the coaches in the state of Ohio. There was nothing that the coaches in the state of Ohio wouldn't do for Jim Tressel. He was so good for kids, and was great at having conversations, and he was so relatable, and he commanded respect, but not in the same way. He managed his intensity and how much he cared about football, way better than I did, way better maybe than Urban did, way better than some of those other people. But Jim's approach couldn't be mistaken for lacking intensity, because that's not true. But he did a really good job of managing that. Because again, I don't think Tress wore people out, like some of us might have.
Yeah.
And everybody liked Tress, and not everybody liked some of the people that I have named and mentioned, and not everybody liked me. And that's probably because we didn't manage our intensity, or we didn't work as hard at relationships.
You probably beat him, Coach.
Now, and I think Nick does, but Tress was a master at that.
Yeah, you probably beat him, Coach. That's why they didn't like you. But
No, I'm not talking about the people we're playing against. I'm talking about the people who in our community
that still didn't like you.
Well, no. Again, we didn't just want to win. We were trying to achieve a standard of excellence with the way we played. And so we could win, and I might not be happy with your child. And for much of my 16 years here, I felt like I had to win back the players on Monday after the weekend when we won. Because of what they heard in the barbershops or what they heard in church or what they heard in the neighborhoods or at home, and those people weren't selling discipline and they weren't selling unselfishness. We'd win 42-6, and the starting running back, he'd leave here happy because he had 16 carries for 180 and 3 touches, and he'd come back with a frown on Monday because they thought he should have had more touches.
Wow.
That was reality here, and it was real in Warren too.
It's real everywhere
today than it was back then. But
yeah,
I believe that you have to win back your players every Monday. In the circumstances in which I coached it.
Wow, I've never even thought about that, Coach. I mean, I'm learning. So Urban Meyer comes and becomes the head coach at The Ohio State University, and I remember my brother, who was my defensive coordinator, he actually went to his first clinic and he watched practice. And my brother left, and my brother is got an edge, but he said that is the most vicious practice, the most intensity. He said it was just nasty. And the thing that Coach Meyer hung his hat on was all those guys were Ohio guys on that entire staff. Everybody had some type of connection. So can you tell us a little bit about that? I mean, he went undefeated in his first year, Coach Meyer, when he went to Ohio State.
Well, he was well prepared, because of he was the GA for Earl, and he coached for other good people, as an assistant at multiple places. He did a good job at Bowling Green. He had the high pedigree. Earl Bruce, Woody Hayes, the whole thing. He could command a room, whether he was speaking at a clinic or he was, talking to kids at a high school camp. But he was a great communicator. He had an intensity level that was, it wasn't like something he turned on and turned off. That was just who he was. He was a guy that, not everybody warmed to him, but I go back to knowing him when he was a GA before he became, famous and so on and so forth. So I liked him, and I had a great relationship with him.
Who are some of the best coaches that you ever coached against, and why?
Well, Chuck Kyle was the head coach in a place here called St. Ignatius.
Yeah.
And it's a Catholic school in the Cleveland area.
Yeah.
And I think he's the best football coach that I ever coached against. There's a lot. It's hard for me to name.
What was so good about Chuck Kyle, Coach?
He was an English teacher and a football coach.
Man.
He's at a prestigious, parochial school that you got to test to get into. He was always a cutting edge guy. He was playing cover 4 before, the rest of us were playing cover 4. He was throwing the football. Maybe it was from 2 back and then eventually, 1 back. But he was doing it maybe, a little sooner than the rest of us transitioned to that. The same thing defensively. He was playing the 4-3 and mixing coverages, disguising coverages maybe before, the rest of us, we're doing that to the same extent. McKinley and Warren were public schools and not necessarily, they were independents also. And so we had to schedule all 10 of our games, independently. We weren't in a league where, we knew we had these guys every year. And I knew that and typically a lot of the parochial schools play the best football in many states. Not all of them, but that's typical here in Ohio. The parochial schools win more state championships than public schools. So I scheduled those guys on purpose because they would make me a better coach. They'd make my staff a better staff, and they'd make our program a better program. And so that whole concept about to be the best, you got to play the best, I believed in that. That's what I was taught, and that's what we did. I had assistant coaches who thought I was crazy for scheduling, Cincinnati Elder and Cleveland St. Ignatius and Erie Prep and Detroit De La Salle. And no, we were going to find the best people, and we were going to put them in our schedule because they were going to make us better. Nobody made us better than Chuck Kyle and St. Ignatius.
And what's your relationship like with Ted Ginn Sr., Coach, up at Glenville? I know he's been such a great coach and had so many great players.
Yeah. We played against him a couple of times, and we had good fortune against him. I believe that they beat us, once or maybe twice when we were at Warren Harding. But we became – I think we became head coaches at about the same time. But I respect the daylights out of what he's done because no public school in the Cleveland area has done what he's done. They're the best and the most successful public school in the Cleveland area, and and we're talking about big time Division I football. And so I have a lot of respect for him. And he and I, we know each other. We like each other. He called me. We're in the playoffs. If you've got time for this story, you can always edit it out. But
nah, Coach, there's no editing, Coach. We're the low man on the totem pole, Coach. Okay. It's coming out there, and the low man always wins.
Okay.
Yeah, Coach.
Yeah, that is true. I believe in that. We teach that. But we're both in the playoffs in the state of Ohio, and we're both in the same district. And he played. I can't remember who it was, but he got beat, and we played the team that beat him the next week. And so he called me because the tailback in St. Ed's in Cleveland, another parochial school power in Cleveland. He had a tailback that transferred from Glenville to St. Ed's. And St. Ed's beat Glenville to knock them out of the playoffs, and then we had St. Ed's the next week. And Ted called me on Monday, and he said, Coach, he said, and I don't even remember the names, and it's insignificant, but he said, Coach, he said, the back that was here that went there, he says, if your guys light him up early, he's gonna check out. And so we share that information with our guys, that we got to get after the tailback early in the game. We got to test his toughness, and we got to challenge his manhood and his ability to take a hit, because it'll be to our advantage. We did that, and Ted Ginn was right. I think we lit them up the first or second play. We were good, and they were good too. They were the number one team in Ohio, and maybe the number one team in the USA Today poll at that particular time. But we beat them in Cleveland Stadium, and a lot of our success was the fact that we got after the tailback based upon a conversation that Ted Ginn had with me. So I respected him for that, and not a lot of people know that. There's a lot of people that might find out about this, for the first time ever, but that's okay.
Yeah, I don't know, Coach. If they can find us on YouTube. But Kerry Combs was on Urban Meyer's first staff, and he was a high school coach in the Cincinnati area, correct, Coach? How well do you know Coach Combs? And I know he's intense also, but what is so good about him?
He was intense, and he did a great job. I'm trying to remember which school in Cincinnati that he was at. I do not believe it was a parochial school. I think it was a public school. but he did a great job. And you know, again, Urban was willing to hire guys out of high school, you know, because it would help his whole recruiting process. And it was, you know, he was putting a stamp of approval on somebody from Ohio high school football. And you know, he learned that from Earl, and he knew that Woody did that and Bo did that. And so, you know, Urban at one time extended an offer to me, but I remained at Warren Harding as the head coach.
To coach at the Ohio State University, coach.
Yeah, he had a position as a recruiting coordinator that would transition into a position coach at some point in time. I couldn't imagine not coaching football, though.
Okay.
I couldn't imagine it. I didn't want to be a recruiting coordinator.
Yeah, you didn't want to be an off-the-field guy. You like to be on the field.
There's no question. So I passed on that opportunity. But he hired Kerry, and Kerry was worthy. You know, he did a great job where he was in Cincinnati. And, you know, Kerry, you know, I'm sure that Urban had a relationship with him. And Kerry was intense. He got the best out of players. And he did a good job for Luke Fickell. Wasn't he with Luke Fickell at Cincinnati here recently?
Yes, sir. I think he went back to Cincinnati after he was defensive coordinator at the Ohio State University with Coach Day. Gosh, Coach, we've talked about a lot of different stuff, but yeah, Coach Ryan Day, I know he took over to be the head coach. Is he an Ohio guy?
That's a good question. I have not met him, and I didn't have any dealings with him, you know, because he came in as I was going out.
Yeah.
But they tell me he has a good reputation among Ohio high school football coaches. They tell me that he's doing a great job of establishing relationships with them. You know, they have a clinic. He's very supportive. So I get good reports about him, but I do not know him.
Yes, sir. I forgot what I wanted to say, but in Virginia, there's some GOAT recruiters, and one of them is Jim Cavanaugh, who recruited Michael Vick to Virginia Tech. And another one is Jim Reed, who was head coach at the University of Richmond. But who are the best recruiters that you ever had in your school, and what made them so great? You talked about those relationships with the high school coaches, but who were the best, Coach?
Well, there were a bunch, you know, and if you're talking about,
just give me a top five, the top five best recruiters you ever had to deal with, and what was so good about them.
Well, Nick, because he had a presence about him, even as an assistant coach.
And why was that? Was that because of his dad or where he had been before?
I don't know. He grew up in West Virginia. His dad owned a gas station. I have no idea. But you know, Nick had a presence about him even as an assistant coach. He had a great reputation as a defensive coach. And you know, a lot of times they made my stop the last stop of the day. And you know, we share information about the player. They'd look at a little bit of film, maybe eyeball him if he was, you know, practicing basketball, and maybe we'd go out to dinner. But Nick was willing to share what he knew, and you had to pay attention and you had to be sharp because he could lose you in just a few minutes because he was so intelligent and you know, he coached the game defensively, you know, above and beyond, you know, what we could do in high school, but he was so knowledgeable and he was thorough and he was on time.
That's a great point though, Coach. That was a great point that you made, that you were their last stop. And that just shows the respect and that they could spend the most amount of time with you. I never thought about that. I mean, I know some guys make me their last stop, but that's a good point. I mean, that's a secret.
They knew that I wasn't punching the clock, you know, that I didn't have to get home to anything. I went home when it was done, you know. Bob Ligashevsky, who I think is in the NFL, Josh hired him in Denver when he was in Denver, and he's been both in major college, and he was at Bowling Green when he recruited My quarterback in 1990 went on to start, have a good career at Bowling Green. But he's been at multiple places. Remind me of the name of the head coach at Pitt.
That's Narduzzi.
Pat Narduzzi.
Yeah, Narduzzi.
Pat Narduzzi, was a great recruiter.
What was so good about him, Coach?
Same. He was a defensive-oriented guy, and he knew that I was offensive-oriented, so we'd have those conversations where I was always trying to learn, more about what was coming, because stuff filters down,
Yeah.
What the college was doing, I learned to do the high school version of what they were doing on offensive, defense, and special teams.
That leads me into my next question.
I learned to do the high school version of what they did in New England.
Yeah. That leads me into my next question, because that's what you talked about in the other podcast, is that you would go visit colleges, you would go visit Josh's practices, and then you would bring that back to your program and not do it the same, but make it yours and make it the best high school version. So talk a little bit about that for our listeners, Coach.
Well, it's the NFL, the college, and the high school game, they're not the same. They're not the same.
That was what the guy said. Yeah, the guy was like, it's the same. And you were like, it's not the same because the hashes aren't the same. The field goal post ain't the same.
No, we can't do what New England does, but we can do a version of it. We can't do what Alabama or Ohio State or Michigan or Pitt does, but we can do a version of it. And I was, I didn't want to be that guy that was lagging behind. And so I went 2 places every spring. They let me go at McKinley and Warren Harding. And I went by myself because the other coaches couldn't get off, but they let me go as the head coach. But I went for specific reasons. Let me give you an example. I watched bowl games all the time, through bowl season when the bowls mattered. And I watched Maryland play, and they ran a double screen, where they had the tailback on the right side and they had the wideout on the back side.
Yeah. The swing and then a jailbreak on the other.
Yes, exactly. And I'm at Warren Harding, and I got Mario Manningham as a wideout, and I have Danny Boom Heron, who's a tailback for Ohio State, is the running back, and I was always a screen guy.
You talked about that,
but we weren't a double screen team, so I drove to Maryland, during spring ball, not when the clinic was taking place. It might have been on a Monday or Tuesday or a Wednesday, for goodness sakes. But Gary Blackney was there as an assistant coach, who had been an assistant coach for Earl here in Ohio. And so he set me up. So I went there, and I learned how, they put me in a room. The GA gave me all kinds of film about double screens. So I took tape home with me, and I took all the coaching points home with me, and then shared it with my guys. But our hashes aren't the same as the college hashes. It was a better middle of the field play than it was a hash play, because our hash is so condensed. You've only got 17 yards to play with into the boundary. And so, I figured out our version of that, but we did it. We hoped to do it at the highest version of high school football as we could. I did that with New England stuff. I did that with Denver stuff. I do that with Raider stuff. But it had to be watered down. It had to be a version of that same thing that could get you success in high school, but maybe it wouldn't have made me successful in college if we did it our way. So I was a big believer in that.
Yeah, Coach, like when I watch like New England play, like Tom Brady's 2-minute play is the empty in the hoss, the hitch seam, and the number 3 guy gets open. And that's something we could do on the high school level. We can't do it all. But that's my girlfriend calling me, Coach. She's getting off of work as a nurse. I'm still Nina. My girlfriend's from Rock Hill, Coach. Rock Hill, South Carolina. That's a pretty good football down there. And she knew, like I told you, that I was interviewing the Raiders' dad's head coach. So I hope she understands. She's from Rock Hill. I hope I was as good a recruiter as you, Coach.
Well, if she does understand, she might be the right one then.
Yeah, Coach. I agree. She's been with me for 3 years. So, man, of all the things that you learned from these different visits, and you talked about going to watch your son's practices in New England, and he would go and talk to Coach Belichick and say, "Hey, can my dad come to practice?" Can you talk about that, Coach?
Well, when Josh first got to New England, he knew that young coaches should be seen and not heard.
Ooh.
And
say that again, Coach. Say that again.
As a young coach, he understood. He's coaching for the best NFL football coach that's ever been, and this was, they were winning their first Super Bowls and they went on to win many more. But guys like that, when you're a quality control guy, a 20 guy, you keep your ears open and your mouth shut until you know enough, to open your mouth and speak. Where are we going with this?
Yeah, I was just gonna say he was when you would visit practice and he would go to Coach Belichick.
Yeah, but there was a time when he was unwilling to even ask if I could come to practice, because he hadn't done enough. And I agree with him. He hadn't done enough to expect to be able to ask that question and get the answer that he was looking for, until he worked for Bill for several years. And then at some point, he'd established, an identity of his own as an offensive coordinator, and Bill and he had a great relationship, and so he asked him. He said, "Hey, whether it's OTAs or minicamp in the spring, or whether it was 2 days in the fall or whatever, but I'd be in town," and he said, "Hey, Bill," he said, "my dad's in town. Can he come to practice?" And Bill said, "Certainly." And so a couple of weeks would go by or whatever, and then I go out in August, and Josh would say, "Hey, Bill, my dad's in town. Can he come to practice?" Absolutely. Well, they reached a point where Josh said, "Hey, my dad's in town." And Bill said, "Don't ask me anymore. Your dad's welcome here anytime." So that's kind of cool how that worked out. Now, I copied my son's approach, as the young guy who needed to keep his ears open, his mouth shut. When I went to practices, I never approached Bill. I never approached Robert Kraft. I never approached Tommy Brady or any other player. That wasn't what they were there for. They weren't there to talk to me. This is pre-practice or post-practice. I never did that. And I'd be behind the huddle on the field, or I'd be 10 yards away from the drill. I wasn't on the sidelines. I had free reign to be wherever I was, but I knew I was there to keep my eyes open and my mouth shut, and but Bill never failed to come up to me at some point and say, "Hey, Tom," and shake his hand. We have a brief conversation. Neither did Robert Kraft, or neither did Tommy Brady.
Wow.
I knew that it wasn't my place to approach them. And those people, that's a great owner, that's a great quarterback, and that's a great head. But they felt good enough about my relationship with my son, and they felt good enough about Josh that they came to me. Not that I was, does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it totally does. Because Coach, I'm a high school coach in Richmond, Virginia, and I feel the same way about getting you on our podcast. So it means the same to me, Coach. You got 2 sons that are NFL coaches, and you talked about this, that the roles are reversed. They were the kid and you were the coach. Now they're the coach, and you're older and you're watching them. Talk about that.
Josh told me when I came to the first practice, he said, "Dad, you have to behave and not get in the way." I told him at 4 and 5.
Behave and
you can't get in the way.
Coach, I'm a football junkie. I talk about how much I went through just to get this thing hooked up, Coach. I wasn't going to quit. I'm almost envious of you, Coach, that you've gotten to watch the Patriots practice, and you have sons who are NFL coaches. So I mean,
now listen to me. Okay. I'm impressed that you were as determined to get this thing to work. However, whatever format we had to use, you were determined to get it. and so that reminds me of a little story.
Yeah.
You may have heard it before, because I've said it before. There's a difference between being involved and being committed. Okay?
Yeah.
And you were committed. And the difference between being involved and being committed is the difference between ham and eggs. The chicken was involved, but the pig was committed.
Amen.
Okay? But no, you impressed me with your commitment to get this done. It's 8:30. It's 8:30 now, and we're still.
And I just said I gotta do FaceTime, and I'm just gonna have to put you on FaceTime and stream it. Yeah,
okay,
Coach.
I have no idea what that means, but I believe you.
Yeah, I got you on FaceTime, and they're recording you, and they're seeing you talk about football, Coach. And I mean, and you love football. I mean, and John Gruden, your brother. I mean, your son replaced him as head coach with the Raiders, but he was the son of a coach, and his big thing is, do you love football? And Coach, can you tell when you meet a coach that really loves it?
Yeah. Oh yeah. John's dad recruited my school when he was at Notre Dame.
Man.
John, somewhere along the line, Josh met him, and they know each other. This is when Josh was in New England as assistant coach, and John got fired, and he gave Josh a visor. He said, "Hey, has your dad ever been fired?" Josh says, "I don't think so." And John says, "Well, he will be someday." And it's the Fired Football Coaches Association.
Yeah. That was when he's in Tampa. Yeah.
Yeah, I have one of those visors.
Oh man. Yeah, Coach, you never got fired, Coach. I mean, you jumped around a little bit, a few schools, but you was always at some winners, Coach. It's
I got let go as an assistant coach. When I left Orville the first time to go to Mansfield.
And why was that? You were smarter than the head coach?
No, I was an assistant coach.
Yeah, but were you smarter than the head coach?
No, I don't think so at all. We were high school teammates, but we were different in personality, and we were philosophically different relative to a lot of things, and so it did work out, and that's when I went back to Orville, and the rest is history. So, and he ended up being he's in the Ohio High School Football Coaches Hall of Fame also. So he was a great high school football coach, but it just didn't work out. And somebody told me there's only two kinds of coaches: the ones that have been fired and the ones that are going to be.
Amen. And that is true, Coach. So do Ohio high school coaches, do they let their players go out of state? You said you had Mario Manningham and he went to Michigan, but do y'all make sure your guys stay in state?
I didn't do that. When all is said and done, I'm going to be coaching at Canton McKinley next year, or Warren Harding, and you're going to be where you're going to be. So don't go to Ohio State because I told you to go to Ohio State. You go to Ohio State because you think that's the best fit. Mm-hmm. Or you go to Michigan State or Michigan or Baldwin Wallace or John Carroll or I created a worksheet for my players. It was 2.5 pages of questions that they had to ask the colleges.
Go through some of those, Coach.
What's your redshirt policy? Do you pay for summer school? Is there a church in your community that is my church? Mm-hmm. What's the makeup of your community? What percent of the community is black? Do you have mandatory study table? I mean, it's 2.5 pages. So, and I said, you take this with you on your visit. And a lot of times they would tell you the answers to those questions before you ask. But if they didn't, you pop that baby out and you ask those questions because what makeup is the student body? Am I going to be comfortable there? I've got Greek kids who go to Greek Orthodox churches. Is there a Greek Orthodox church in your college town? I mean, so I try to help kids find a place that fit them best. And if it happened to be Ohio State, it was Ohio State. But if it wasn't, that's fine. If it's Michigan, wherever.
Yeah.
Let's just make sure it's a good fit for you.
Yeah, I mean, and most kids aren't going to go to those Power 5 big schools, but most are going to go to the smaller schools to play ball. But what advice did you give them? Because, I mean, sometimes there might be a position coach who's a great recruiter, and the kid wants to go there because of the coach, but then the coach is gone. What advice did you – I mean, you gave them the questions, but what helped determine their decision? Was it the answers to those questions?
Well, I mean, I don't have those questions in front of me, so I'm a function from memory, but somewhere on that list was, if you didn't play football, would you still want to go to that school?
That's it.
And if the guy that's recruiting you, that's sucking up to you and trying to sell his university, if he leaves and there's a lot of movement in college football, are you still going to want to play football there? That was one of the things that they were taught to consider. How many starters are back at your position? How many guys at my position are you recruiting? How many guys at my position are you offering? When you play big time football, you got to compete against not only the guys that are already there, the guys that are going in with you, but you got to recruit. You got to compete against the guys coming in behind you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so those were all significant considerations, and the real genuine big time football players that I had, they passed all those tests. They but I had to tell them it was our responsibility to tell them, hey, they might recruit the next Mario Manningham, and the year after you go there. I just, from all the experience I had, I just tried to make them think. And when a kid came in and told me he was ready to commit, I said, fine, you go home and you talk this over with your parents. And if you come back in tomorrow and tell me you want to commit, then I'll make the call. And when I make the call, you make no more visits, and the recruiting process stops for you.
Yeah, and no more coaches are coming in. No more coaches. Did you have coaches ask, can I see a kid who is committed? Can I talk to him?
Yeah, I wouldn't let him.
Yeah.
I wouldn't let him. And if you're not okay with that, then I'm not calling that coach to tell him you're committed. The process ends for you when you make a commitment, because that's your word.
Yeah, because they're supposed to shut it down then. They got the guy they want.
Yeah.
And that's that loyalty. That's that old school. Do you consider yourself to be old school, Coach?
Oh, hell yeah. I'm 74 years old next month.
So what makes you old school other than, you're in your 70s?
Well, I don't look like I'm in my 70s. Being around kids for 40 years and raising 3 boys, has kept me young. Having my sons coach, 2 of the 3 coach, that's kept me young. I still love the game. I still miss the game. But I was born in 1949. I was raised in the 50s and the 60s, and what people believe then is not what people believe now. And so I have hung on to, hopefully, the good things about being an older man, and I've transitioned, out of the things that aren't attractive or aren't acceptable now as being an older man. Hopefully I've transitioned and to where I'm an older guy in terms of age, but I'm not totally old fashioned in terms of the way I think.
Yes, sir. So for the young coaches out there might be a young coach out there that's a high school coach, and they want to advance in the profession.
Yep.
And some guys nowadays, like I had a GA that worked for me in Virginia Union. He told me, I'm only going to take a high school job if I'm the head coach or a coordinator. And I told the dude, I said, dude, ain't nobody going to let you call plays. You never even coached before. So what do you say to those guys? This is just this millennial generation, Coach, that they just want it.
Well, nobody ever said that to me, but if they did, I'd tell them that you're not fit to coach. You need to go sell cars. That's an unrealistic approach to getting to where you want to be.
And that's also being disrespectful to high school coaches, because high school coaches, that's where the rubber meets the road. You got to make them. You can't recruit them. You can't, get free agents or trade.
Yeah. I was asked to speak at Mount Union University. I don't know if you are aware, they're the best D3 program.
Larry Karras, Coach. I'm familiar.
Yeah. Okay. So
Coach Glenn Ramsire, Coach. You know Coach Ramsire? That was the head coach at Wilmington in Ohio.
I don't believe so. No.
Yeah, it was the college where Paul Brown held his training camp. He was my college coach. His name's Bill Ramsire.
Yeah, that's where Cincinnati, went through.
Yes, sir, Cincinnati. You're exactly right. So,
you're gonna make me forget what I was gonna say
Yeah.
here.
Yeah. We were talking about my GA that said he was only going to take a high school job if he was the coordinator or a head coach.
Okay. They asked me to speak to this coaching class at Mount Union, and it was about transitioning from an assistant coach to a head coach. And that's one of the best clinic presentations that I've ever made. And I did that here in the last couple of years. And if you send me your address, I'll send that to you. I don't know if I have it in e-format or
Coach, we might just get you to come back and present it, Coach, on the clinic.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'd love to do that. I've been asked to speak in a lot of clinics, so I'd be happy to do that. Anyway, one of the things that I told them, I said, as an assistant coach who aspires to be a head coach, first off, you major in one position and you minor in another.
Ooh.
So let's say you were an O-lineman. Okay. So you got a little bit of understanding and you got some knowledge relative to being an O-line coach, but you major in O-line play, and I'm going to recommend that you minor in D-line play. And once you complete that major and that minor, then you become a double major and a double minor. If you're an O-line guy, then you need to major in running backs, and if you minor in linebackers. And when I say that, I'm talking about going everywhere you have to go, whether that's in person, whether that's via the internet. However, go to any clinic, but you need to know more than you know right now, because as a head coach, you have to have the ability to coach your coaches. If you don't know jack crap about running backs, then how can you help your running back coach be better? If you don't know jack crap about D-line play, how can you make your D-line coach better? So, and they're looking at me and they thought, well, no, that makes sense. But I don't think there's a lot of young guys that understand that. You're not just coaching players, you're coaching your staff. And that doesn't mean that I'm more knowledgeable than my secondary guy, but I got to be knowledgeable enough that we can have a conversation and I can ask him a question or he can ask me a question and we can debate it and we can make it better. So that was one of the things that was involved in that clinic presentation. One of the things you already heard, whatever job they give you is the most important job you have at that moment in time. If you're doing scout cards, that's the most important job you have. If you're running the pre-practice stretch, that's the most important job you have. You got to have that attitude. So,
and I think you said it in the other podcast. Every day is your interview. I mean, everybody puts so much weight on the interview where you're sitting at the table, but you're basically interviewing every day by what you're doing. Do you have that same philosophy, Coach?
Well, I didn't say that, but I wish I had.
Yeah, I mean, like whatever you do at the job you have is what your interview is, because that's what you're going to be known as. So for the high school coaches out there that want to go to college football, you had a chance to go to The Ohio State University. I'm sure you probably had other chances. there's a guy that I just met, and he tells me he wants to go coach college football. Well, I mean, he doesn't know anybody.
Well, to me, if you want to be a college football coach, you need to get a GA. That's the path to college coaching now, in my opinion.
Yes, sir.
You get it.
It is.
You get a GA, and you start that network, because your high school network is only going to get you so far. Remember what I told my sons? This is where my influence ends, and Nick Saban and Glenn Mason's begins. I can't help you anymore. So if you want to coach college football, then you need to get a graduate assistantship somewhere, or an internship. I mean, however and whatever. That's, we just skipped right past high school with my kids. They wanted to coach, and I sent them right to yep. That's the path to coaching at college to me.
Yeah. So these guys that are head high school coaches, they may have a chance to go to college, but they have to be really good and know a lot of people and do a great job at where they are.
Yeah, Glenn Mason was the head coach at Kent State, and the first year he got that job after being an assistant coach at Ohio State for Woody and Earl, he asked me to go with him, and I had 3 kids. They were little, and I was, I would have to take like a $7,000 pay cut to leave here as an English teacher, head coach, and go to Kent State as an assistant, and I couldn't do that.
Yeah.
I couldn't do that. Now, that was before they started to pay assistants good money in college, and they're paying them good money now.
Yeah. People ask me that all the time, and I mean, there's only a few jobs that you can leave being a head coach and a teacher and make more. I mean, some small schools, they don't pay the assistants a lot, and there's only
I could take a little financial hit, but I couldn't take a $7,000.
Yeah, that's a lot of money, Coach, especially when your kids were young. Because, I mean, me and your sons that were around the same age. I was born in 78.
This is in the middle of the 1980s.
Oh, man. I mean, gas was less than $1. Now I don't even know what it is, Coach. I don't even look.
Yeah, I only put. I won't go past $40. $40.
So, do you watch the NFL games live when your sons are coaching, or do you go to the games? Like, how does that work being a parent of I mean, there's only 32 of those guys on the entire planet, and one of them is your son. I mean, that's pretty special.
Yeah, well, I got 2 sons in the league, so we're going to try to get games, go to games both places. And when they play near me, if they play Cincinnati, Indianapolis, Detroit, Cleveland, Buffalo, Pittsburgh, that's easier to get to those games than their home games.
Yes, sir.
Because those are all within, normal driving distance. But, Josh makes big money, so he flies to Vegas, and we see a game here. Maybe he's at Seattle the next week, so then he flies us to Houston because they're home, and then Houston goes on the road. Then he flies us back to Vegas because he's home, and then he may send us home, for a week. I got grandkids. I got 8 grandkids, and 7 of them live in Houston or Vegas. So we combine seeing grandkids with football, but we were all over the place this last season, between Houston and Vegas, and seeing them when they played close.
Yes, sir. Did they ever play against each other this season?
Yeah, they played against each other last year in New England when he was there. They played at Houston, and New England won. In a close game, they had to come from behind to win. And then they played at Vegas this year, and it was another close game, and Vegas won.
Yeah. The play against the Patriots and the Raiders, where the kid threw the football across the field.
Yeah.
I mean, was that a part of their plan, or was that guy just made a bonehead decision?
No, that was a Maurice Clarett decision in reverse. Maurice responded spontaneously to the interception and did the right thing. But from what I'm told, that was a player who made a spontaneous decision about doing something with the football, that was the wrong thing to do.
Yes.
They did not practice that. That was not part of the plan.
Like Reggie Bush did in the national championship. Like, do you remember when he flipped that ball backwards and then it was a fumble? I don't know if you remember that. I'm going to ask you this, Coach, because I might not ever have another chance to ask somebody that is as close to NFL coaches. When the 49ers played, both the Harbaugh brothers played each other. Colin Kaepernick was the quarterback, and he threw 2 fade balls to Crabtree at the goal line. Did Greg Roman call those plays or were those checks, Coach? Do you know?
No, I don't know that.
I've always wondered that.
Yeah, I have no idea.
I mean, because it could have been all different, like if they would have handed the ball to Frank Gore. But it's kind of like Ernie Adams carding up, that slant. And, your son, I don't even know what ring that was he won when the Butler kid got in front of the slant. Were you at that game?
Yep, I was at that game.
And that's a crazy story that Ernie Adams had carded that up. What do you know about Ernie Adams, Coach? Because he's kind of,
Not much. He's a very quiet guy. And he and Bill have a relationship that goes back to high school or college or whatever. But all that is that's good preparation on Ernie's part. He's studying film, and he sees and has multiple examples of how Seattle responds to a bunch set, right? Down near the goal line.
Yeah, they were loaded up.
And so they had a high expectation about what was about to happen. So they practiced the hell out of that. And then the kid does the very right thing at the very right time. And that's the way it's supposed to be. So, hats off to Ernie for seeing that and making that a big deal, and hats off to the Patriots for practice today. The other thing I want to tell you about if you're going to give a quarterback the privilege of checking out of something into something else.
Yes.
If you're going to do that, then you have to live with that.
It was a loaded box. I mean, it was cover zero.
I'm just telling you, but if you're going to give him that privilege, then you live with the result. And you can lock a play call too. You can lock the run call to the running back if you believe in that. And then that's what you're going to do. But if you're giving them the freedom, and New England has done that, they made a history out of that. They did RPOs before anybody else did. They were run-pass options. When Tommy points to his helmet and says, alert, alert, he's changing. And they've done that forever. It's not the modern-day RPO, but they got out of a bad play and into a better play.
Yeah, and
if you give your quarterback the freedom to do that, then you live with that outcome.
I remember watching the Patriots play, and Brady's under the center, and it looks like he's handing off inside zone to the right, but the line's blocking to the left, and I was like, what in the world is this? Then I find out it's duo or power no pull, whatever you're going to call it. But did they originate that play? Because that was the first time I ever seen it, Coach.
I don't know if they originated it, but I know this. How many people, in high school, you speak for your state, and then I'll tell you for mine. How many people are one back under in high school?
I mean, Coach, there's not many people that are under at all in our state.
Okay. If I coached today, if I was a head coach today, I'd be in a ton of one back under. And let me tell you why. New England was, right? You're just talking about that.
Yes, sir.
There's any play action from under is way better than any play action from the gun.
Yeah.
It is.
That's why they do it. That's why they do it.
That's not debatable. I'd be one back under a ton. And because nobody does it in high school. They're all gun here in Ohio, or they're a combination of the two. But I'd be one back under, and we knew how to block one back power and duo, and the play action off of that is awesome.
I mean, the Redskins were running in 1982.
Yes.
I mean, Joe Gibbs, I mean, he's got to be. Bill Belichick's the greatest, but Joe Gibbs won 3 Super Bowls with 3 different quarterbacks, and his offense is still good today.
Yeah.
In pro football.
Yeah. Here's another thing. I'll just say this, and then I'll get off my high horse. People got their quarterbacks in a gun because they're asking athletes to be quarterbacks, and yet they're not coaching them as quarterbacks.
Because they can't coach a 5-step drop from under the center. It's
the worst coached position in America.
Coach, talk about it, Coach. Talk about coaching that position. Quarterbacks.
I coached them for 40 years. I wasn't just a head coach. I was a position coach. And I was that as an assistant coach. But there's a whole lot that you don't have to coach when you're in the gun. And they're doing it because then they don't have to coach all that stuff you have to coach when you put a kid under. My kids, for me, we were under and gun. And they 3-step from high school under. They operated out of the gun. The best play action was from under center. We booted. We waggled. We power passed. We ISO play action passed. And I had to transition from being a 2-back guy to being both. How about this too? I train quarterbacks.
Yes, sir.
At the end of this month, and I don't want any kid that ever works with me to not know how to take a snap under center. But do you know how many kids? Ben Roethlisberger played in a high school offense from Findlay, Ohio, and he went to Miami of Ohio, or he went to the All-Star game, the Big 33 game.
Yeah.
He didn't know how to take. He couldn't start because he couldn't take a snap under center.
Yeah, he was only a 1-year starter, right? Because I mean, the coach's son started for 3 years.
Yeah. Well, I just know that.
Yeah, I mean, Coach Joey Burrow. I mean, all those guys, Tua, Burrow. Every time they get under the center, it's like a fumbled snap. Joey Burrow is from Ohio, correct? His dad was the defensive coordinator at the University of Ohio for Frank Solich.
Yeah, they're under center a bunch, aren't they?
Yeah, they are. I mean,
Mahomes is under center more than he used to be.
Right? Yeah, the NFL is the only people that still do it, and it's because of the play action, correct, Coach?
Well, when you say what kind of pass is best to throw, 7 out of 10 guys will tell you play action. They'll say that's better than 3-step, that's better than 5-step.
Yeah, because you got to defend both.
If you believe in running the ball, that's going to be your answer. But then you get in a formation that doesn't allow you to be the best at it. I don't understand that. Yeah,
like you said, Coach, it's just people are lazy. They don't want to learn the footwork with the quarterback. But like when I have these DB coaches on and the guys in the gun, he's got to take his eyes off that defense to catch the football. Joe Montana and Tom Brady, when they're under the center, they don't have to take their eyes anywhere. So I think that's probably another advantage to go under the center. Would you agree with that?
Not completely. That happens so quickly that's insignificant to me.
Okay.
That's insignificant to me. This is another thing. We were big on. Again, I learned this from Josh's experience coaching defense. We coached the heck out of our guys understanding fronts and coverages. And it finally occurred to me, I wish I had done it my whole head coaching career, but it only happened about the last half of the career, is we called the coverage in our cadence. Blue two, set. Because we had cover 2 beaters, cover 3 beaters, cover 4 beaters, man beaters, and so on and so forth. And I wanted to put the receivers and the quarterback all on the same page. So if the quarterback called it 2, then the receivers treated it as 2. We weren't going to convert a hitch against cover 3, but we convert a hitch versus 2 to a fade. You understand me?
Yes, sir.
So we identified the coverage in our cadence. Red 4. The color was insignificant. The number mattered. And if we called it on one, it'd be red 4, set. If we called identified as cover 4, and we had a run play. My wideouts blocked safeties, and they didn't give a daggum about the corner.
Yeah, Coach, you're old school. That's what we do. Because corners don't like to tackle. And
well, they're not. That's not why you're playing cover 4, because those guys are great tacklers. You got a 9-man box basically if you're playing cover 4.
In a 2-back.
The running team the way
21.
So, yeah, if it was a run play, we're running power, and we say blue 3, they were blocking corners.
Yeah, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Let me. I did that my whole life, but I didn't.
Well, you just taught me something, Coach. So.
Yeah. And we alerted plays in high school with Ben and Josh. We package a run with a pass or a pass with a run, and at the line of scrimmage they changed it from one to the other.
So it was a good box, bad box deal. Like, which one was better?
It depended. To me back then, because again, this was the transition to where we were both under, gun, 2-back, and 1-back. You with me?
Yes, sir.
So, and I'm a big believer in having a tight end, because a tight end, attached tight end, not detached, an attached tight end dictates a lot of fronts.
Yes, it does.
Okay. I want to run ISO.
Yeah.
At the bubble.
That's our play, Coach.
Okay. So we're going to go rocket ISO check. And if we can dictate the front, then we're going to run it weak at the 1 and 5 bubble versus a 4-3. You with me?
Yes, sir.
We might run power, toss, check. If we're getting a DN that's playing inside shade on a tight end, we're going to toss it and pull uncovered.
Hey,
if he's an outside leverage, a 9 technique that we can kick out, then we're going to run power. Yes,
somebody said that. I don't know when it was, but if they're playing a 9 technique, run it inside of them. If they're playing a 7 technique, run outside of them.
That's correct.
And that is just the basics of football. Let me ask you about the quarterback footwork, because I know you remember when guys would get under the center and they're a right-handed quarterback, they would cheat their left foot back.
Yeah, when I first started coaching, we were parallel stance.
Yes.
I transitioned to cheating. It was left toe, right heel.
Yes. So now I see Tom Brady and I see Aaron Rodgers. They put their right foot back in the gun. And on their first step, they take their left foot behind and then plant their right foot. Have they turned the 3-step drop out of the gun into a 2-step drop by doing that?
Yeah, I call it a 1-step, because it's 1 step and then they're into the throw.
Okay, and then if you're a right-handed quarterback, you got to cheat your right foot back in the gun. The left foot goes behind, and then the right foot back.
Yeah, I wasn't a right foot. I had the same stance under and gun.
Yeah.
I did. I kept it the same. Why would I teach 2 different stances if we're going to be both under and gun?
Yeah, Coach.
Stance, and I had a left foot stagger with the quarterback. The other thing I want to tell you too, and this is you would think that people picked up on it. Tommy would change his stance under center based on who your pulling guard was going to be.
Say that. I see these quarter.
Step under is a 3-step in the gun.
Yes, sir. I totally agree with you. I wish I could had the film to show you, but I see these guys.
In the gun is a 3-step under.
Yes, sir. And I see some of these quarterback gurus, coaches, Twitter quarterback coaches, they're teaching their quarterbacks to run out of the pocket and throw the ball late across the middle. This is actually a drill. I guess they're trying to teach a guy to be Patrick Mahomes. But have you seen this? Like, it doesn't.
Yeah. Now understand this. You have more accuracy, more velocity, and more distance when you throw from a balanced set, a balanced platform. Okay? That's a fact. You have more accuracy, more velocity, more distance when you throw from a balanced set, balanced platform. So I coach the hell out of that. And if you can be balanced, then you have to be. If you have to make an off balance throw, I have part of my training time where we work off balance, throwing mechanics. But with Patrick Mahomes, there's a lot of kids that are throwing off balance when they don't have to.
Yes, sir.
And they're giving up accuracy, velocity, and distance when you make an unbalanced throw.
And you believe that when a quarterback throws the ball, that his instep, his stance arrow, the back part of his inside foot should be pointing at his target. Because I see kids all the time, their instep of their back foot is not pointing towards the target, and they're not as accurate. Do you coach that?
Let me try to explain what I coach you about the back foot. It's okay to me if the toe is pointed parallel with the yard line to the sideline. Okay? I would actually prefer that the toe be pointed a little bit toward the line of scrimmage.
So it doesn't matter where the ball is being thrown, like that Nike check mark on the inside of your back foot. Does that need to be pointed towards your target?
I talk about 5 eyes. I'm going to answer it a different way.
Okay.
I know more about quarterbacks than I do about anything.
You're going to have to come back and do a total quarterback talk, Coach.
Okay. All right. I'm a big believer in 5 eyes being on the target. You got an eye in your front knee. You got an eye in your front hip. You got an eye in your front shoulder, and the 2 eyes in your head. Josh is calling me.
Okay, Coach. Yeah. Do we need to end it, Coach?
No, I need to take this call.
Okay, Coach.
All right. We'll continue another time.
Okay, thank you, Coach. Have a good night. So, hey, that's the end of Coach McDaniels. I hope everybody appreciated him coming on. We got it done. We got the FaceTime. And we ended with the head coach of the Raiders calling his dad, which is pretty cool. So thank y'all for tuning in. This is the Championship Football Coaches Clinic. Tomorrow morning, we got Coach Wackenheim, the head football coach from BMI that turned the program around, had 2 winning seasons, the first winning season in 50 years. And then on Wednesday night, we have our friend Chris Beatty, the wide receiver coach from the Chargers, is coming on. So this has been Coach McDaniels' Football Life. I appreciate y'all watching. We're the low man on the totem pole, but the low man always wins.